Welcome to Executives at the Edge, a podcast brought to you by MEF. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers who are propelling enterprise digital transformation forward. I'm really excited to have Steve Thomas, Senior Industry Director for Enterprise Network Services at Frost & Sullivan. And today we're going to cover in this episode, Network as a Service. I think it's really interesting that Steve has written a report on Network as a Service for Frost & Sullivan. And you can find that link for that report in the show notes for this episode. And what's really interesting is some great findings on Network as a Service. So Steve, welcome to Executives at the Edge. And for our listeners, can you tell them more about yourself and Frost & Sullivan? That would be appreciated.
Sure, thanks. Good to see you again, Pascal. It's been since October, I think, the last MEF meeting. So thanks for having me on. Steve Thomas, and I'm with, obviously, Frost & Sullivan within their information, communications, and technology practice. Enterprise network services. And so what that means is I cover the B2B side of telecom, and the ecosystem there is more around the equipment providers and the network operators themselves. And I've been doing that for a couple of years after having about a 25-year history in the industry. Frost & Sullivan, we're a global market intelligence house, and we cover, other verticals besides ICT, security, healthcare, manufacturing, and things of that nature. So that's, and then we also have an advisory practice, which is, similar to a consulting arm of Frost & Sullivan. And that's me and Frost. Thanks.
Well, that is really impressive, and thank you, Steve. So look, hey, we're talking about NaaS, Network as a Service. It looks like you just put out a research report on this. And could you tell us a little bit more about what you've learned? And as you know, Network as a Service has been talked about for over a decade, but MEF has launched out our Network as a Service blueprint, which is really talking about not the old Network as a Service, but more about Network as a Service being the underlays, the overlays of application assurance, the cybersecurity, and then multi-cloud, all bundled or, in some ways in a model that is more of a cloud-like model, which could be subscriptions, pay as you go. We're still maturing this. We're seeing the industry mature. So I'd love to understand more what Frost & Sullivan has learned about NaaS and what your recent research is about.
Sure. So when I titled it "Network as a Service" is transforming network operators into API-focused integrators, to kind of get a catch, to establish my position better for the paper. And what I learned is network as a service. There's quite a bit to it, and actually I did reference some of your MEF framework in the article, because obviously we don't want to reinvent the wheel if you all are already establishing standards, right? So we did do that. And I like to start off with the definition I used. I called it more of a modern business model for service providers to, quote, sell managed network services to enterprises and their wholesale providers. This enables network operators to deliver a cloud-like consumption model with a frictionless customer experience. And that was kind of my definition of trying to get NaaS to a simple effort. But what I really learned was NaaS means things to different providers. And if you're a data center provider, NaaS pretty much means, provisioning level 2 Ethernet services across their data center footprint. If you're talking to an equipment provider, which are actually software providers these days, it's hard not. OEMs is the old name for them, but they're really softwares, and they're looking to position to sell their licenses as much as possible through the network operator. And so they're creating their software to be incorporated into this consumption model as well. And they were the first ones to have subscriptions anyway. And, so it's kind of forcing the network operator to also evolve into subscriptions too, if that's what the equipment providers are doing. And then and then you have the underlying OSS and BSS providers that are also operation systems and services, as well as the business systems, which OSS and BSS means. But in the industry, everyone knows what that is. Just in case you have a few listeners that are outside the industry. They're also working to enable that middleware. They've always been the software middleware between the clients or end customers, companies, and the telecom operator themselves. They kind of help them operate more efficiently through the use of software to enable building networks at large scale. And so, and then you have the obviously the network operators, which is what MEF works with. And so that whole ecosystem is pretty rich. And so when the goal of the paper was to kind of give everyone a little bit of visibility and highlight what NaaS really meant to each one of those players.
So is this research out? Is this report out now? People?
Yeah, it's out. I published it at the end of last year. It was my goal to finish it before the end of the year, and I think I got it published 2 days before we left for break.
Oh, that's awesome. No, so what you're saying now, automation you're saying is a must-have. It's you can't really do NaaS without it, right? Because it's got to be pervasive in your whole delivery model, right? Because people can get involved in this. It's got to be machines doing this to get the cost down and the accuracy and so on. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Automation is key. I actually said the AA should stand for automation in NaaS, because it's so much focus on the automation. The OEM providers themselves are, all of them are trying to position their services as zero-touch provisioning. So it's they're making the devices and the deployment of licenses on white box servers and CPE equipment easy enough to the provider doesn't necessarily always have to roll a truck, and so that helps them out. But it also allows them to apply policies and various network and security policies at a faster rate to keep up with the changing landscape. And so the automation is needed because the networks of today need to be more flexible and adaptive, and allowing a platform that is really more software based is kind of the foundation of network as a service. And that's where the automation, there's tons of automation in there. So it's, all the way from, quoting, billing, and provisioning, to providing prescriptive, feedback on what next steps you might want to do with your network, in terms of even artificial intelligence in the background. So automation covers quite a few different areas in this network as a service model.
So NaaS has been around for a decade plus. It's only because I think we've seen now IT move to the cloud, or many enterprises buying cloud services has become top of the mind. It's obviously a certain commercial model, as you said, a pay-as-you-go or a subscription. It's not these yearly, 3-year contract, 5-year contracts like it used to be. And so that's got challenges. And then you're saying there are different variations or interpretations of NaaS depending on who you are, DC providers, OEMs, operators. Do you see at least the service providers saying I imagine some service providers who are more bandwidth-oriented, transport-oriented would say NaaS is about an on-demand, capability that I can change and ratchet up bandwidth would be NaaS for them. But then if you go to a more tier one that's offering packaging, well, it's not only transports and but I can also give you an overlay for SD-WAN. I can give you cybersecurity. I can give you cloud connectivity. And that bundling is also their definition of NaaS. So you're seeing variations of definitions of NaaS is what you're saying.
Yes, and I think it's not only variation, but it's expanding. So NaaS itself, I think much of the network operators portfolio now will be as a service. So as they grow and expand their portfolios, or even reduce their portfolios to make it more simple, right? The It'll be more as a service, and so that's one thing that I picked up. And then the other thing too is the dynamic bandwidth. That was really what NaaS meant early on. It's
Yeah.
not what it means now. Now it means, yes, you have all these software-defined networking, SASE, SSE components, two things that you can add on. And what I think really enables that is the disaggregation of, the software and the hardware. And so that's something that even when the dynamic bandwidth was allocated, pretty much the OS was still on the router itself, the router or switch. But now that that's separated, you can do an API call in to have that established and done through interfaces that wasn't capable before. But then also, like I said, about the dynamic aspect of networking. Dynamic now means you can tack on additional things, apply policy and things in a much more automated fashion, and as well as having an interface that allows you to visually see your networks and collaborate with your service providers. And I think that's more the evolution of NaaS, where it first came out, it was really just talking about trying to be a dynamic bandwidth, allowing you to, scale up or down as needed. But it's more than that now for sure.
Yeah, I remember it was all about site to my data center, scale up and down bandwidth. And now with everything migration to clouds and cybersecurity and SDN, software-defined networks, and virtualization, we're seeing an automation, all of these stars lining right to just make NaaS now a real viable commercial model of how they can deliver that at scale, at the price points, make margins, so on. So what surprised you most in your study on NaaS?
Actually, I was more surprised at how all the kind of fun work they were doing behind the scenes, because NaaS itself, people think, oh, this is how enterprises are going to consume it, but they started off with the wholesalers really, and so a lot of the inner networking that's happening behind the scenes that makes it easier for the enterprise, they start with the buying and selling amongst themselves, and that was more eye-opening for me, coming not working much with the wholesale industry before, that they're and that makes sense, right? I mean, obviously they know the different network technologies well, because that's what they do on a day-to-day basis, and so they can work with folks like MEF and TM Forum and things of that nature, but they're actually, consuming and helping sell services through each other's platforms, which I found quite interesting and refreshing to see such cooperation amongst the industry peers.
So that's the work we've been doing in Sonata, right? Interconnecting them to make it look like one big global network. We've done it at the data plane. It's kind of what MEF's done with the Carrier Ethernet. Everybody's interconnected with Carrier Ethernet and also IP. They put on a layer on top of it. And everybody in the world has used LAN Ethernet, Carrier Ethernet, and IP to create the data plane interoperability. But what you're saying is now operators are automating also in a standard way to buy and sell, so that as an enterprise buys a service from a retail service provider, they don't understand that that service provider has a limited footprint, but from them they think they can go anywhere in the globe and have that footprint look like it's all over the globe. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, exactly. And we noticed I noticed too that and much with the advent of SD-WAN as a whole, it made everyone more aware that they have to partner stronger in the off-net space. But enabling that, because wholesalers are very thin margin but high volume. I mean, they do sell quite a bit to each other, and so it's ripe for automation because a relatively few amount of players. It's if the top 20 global players have like probably 80% of the market, right? In terms of, and they're all buying and selling from each other because they're not ubiquitous players. They want to offer ubiquitous services, but they know they have to partner where they're not strong with, they're maybe their most fiercest competitor. AT&T and Verizon are fierce competitors in the US, but um, in specific markets, each one of them has, better footprint, and so they work with each other still behind the scenes to sell each other's local access, because you're not everywhere. And so that automation that's happening, and it's more so with the global players, because here locally and the domestically, um, things like the ASR mechanisms that sell between, they've been using it so long, it's not so ripe for innovation because it's not so broke. Something has to be, not at least in the international space. You see that the ability for like a Colt and an AT&T and to cross provision services amongst each other, and I think that's kind of interesting, and that's certainly a part of offering network as a service to make that off-net experience also um, similar to being on net.
Yeah, so basically the provider that sells to the enterprise looks like he has a global network.
Yeah,
And it
no,
should
yeah,
perform globe, give visibility to the customer, just like he owns all the assets, but yet he doesn't, because no provider in the world has every local loop to every point in the world. It's impossible. And so basically they partner together to look like one big federated global network. So, I think really what's interesting is, do you see a lot of operators actually saying NaaS, or are they still thinking in the constructs of NaaS but have not labeled their marketing position as NaaS? I'm interested in this.
um, they are calling the platforms and fabrics um, different. They're not necessarily. They'll say it's NaaS, and it's a term that sounds nice, but it's been around for a long time and it's evolving. So what happens is uh, it means things to different people, right? And so I think in terms of, you see them working with the various teams and providers that they have to say, come to our fabric, come to our any the network the way you want it. Orange has its evolution platform. BT has its global fabric. So they all have different names on it. Colt has their on demand. They call it on demand platform. So that's the difference, is that they do have several names for the services. The CMC in Africa calls its platform CMC Fusion. So Fusion because it's fusing the networks together. But yeah, that's the tricky part for, I think, the consumers is of network services, or the enterprises trying to buy them. It's they're not calling everything the same thing, but that's, the providers want to differentiate, just to say, buy our NaaS versus someone else's, right? Because we're further along, or it's easier, or what have you.
Got it. So they're using brands and marketing names to describe very modern networks, but at the end, it's still on the generic called NaaS, right?
Hmm.
Or as a service, I would say, and
Yeah, as a
and as a
service
service is
model.
the most important thing, which is critical. So look, hey, what capabilities did you find that was the most interesting?
What I found is, I always thought blockchain would be something that the network providers utilize. I mean, they're fantastic about utilizing up and coming protocols. And what I found behind the scenes were for a lot of the settlement in the wholesale space, they were using blockchain to help establish a common set of catalog and inventory amongst each other, using smart contracts within the blockchain to then release and agreed, payments and services to each other. And this really solved a big problem in data settlement for the industry, which was any billing inaccuracy gets into billing disputes, and that's very human nature. It takes a long time to get all of those resolved. And so by using a smart contract, and you guys, it's very accurate, and blockchain itself is a very auditable technology. So once it's agreed and established, then it seems to work out. And it's a I've seen from meetings at MEF and not only others, that it's, the carriers have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of data settlement every year. So it's solving a big problem. Now, it's not pervasive everywhere, but I thought it was pretty interesting. And then I also saw that some of the teams behind the scenes were using that to expand upon doing things with SLAs and making master service agreements and SLAs into smart contracts, and then applying the credits where they weren't successful at honoring the SLAs. And I think that's a real smart way of using blockchain technology within the network operators mechanism, behind the scenes mechanisms.
So what I think you're saying is, for NaaS to really become in a subscription model, or a way that they can control, make margins in their cost and control their cost, is that they have to not only automate with APIs, but they have to use blockchain for settlements. And for example, if an operator relies on other operators and the customer wants to scale up or down their resources, which is very standard in any cloud model, which could be bandwidth, but it could be other things, they have to be able to bill and settle with all their partners in a very accurate way. Because
and fast too. When you talk about dynamic networks, you want to be able to bill, quote, and settle very fast too. Because if someone wants to expand where you have lots of virtual footprint, then it's easier to expand those, and then that allows you to be that cloud-like consumption model too. And so I just thought it was. Not everyone's using it, but I think it's a roadmap for using blockchain for those type of things to help the dynamic aspect of the back office meet the expectation of what's happening in the front office as well. And I think that's the big difference between the dynamic bandwidth of previous to now, is like the full service chain is being automated. And I won't say that's, it's not end to end everywhere. It's pervasive right now, right? MEF, you could declare victory and move on to your next endeavor, right? But it's getting there, which is encouraging and fun, and that's what I think is interesting.
Yeah, MEF, we put about 5 years of investment in this whole area, realizing that the holy grail is settlement, but there are other SLAs, there's other use cases for smart contracts. And I think the essence is that these APIs are already constructing or contracting all kinds of transactions between each other. And so the idea is, how do you codify that in a smart contract and then put that into the blockchain so as an immutable record, so that it's a distributed ledger, so that basically everybody grows that that you can't argue that because a transaction happened, it's stamped by some way of authority of trust. And then basically it is what it is. You made that transaction. You can't dispute it. So therefore I can go and bill on it instantly, and customers can see what their billing is right away. And because the whole ecosystem is aligned. Unfortunately, we've done tons of work in smart contracts and how do you handle and store those transactions in a privacy way and secure way that all the CFOs will sign off on it. There's all kinds of technologies, and we'll get into it, zero knowledge proof and so on. We've also got an integrated trust network to stamp those transactions so you can know those transactions are real and no one mucked around with the records, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, don't you think it's going to be finally the CFO signing off on the idea that this technology I can trust? Because if it's wrong in any way, it can have huge ramifications.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's scary how things happen, but it's like that. But it's like this, anything else, you're built within the blockchain, you're building the guardrails. Within the smart train contract, you're building the guardrails. So I think it's a matter of educating, even, the CFOs that, this is exactly what you agreed to. It's a contract. So just let everything else fall into place. And so as they move more and more things into that, it'll still be something that's already agreed to by all parties. And so it may be tricky for CFOs to kind of get on board with it at first, but I think it's something that'll evolve into normal business practices in the future, whether that's 3 years or 30.
Well, I think in for our speed, I think everything should be a year, but it ends up to be a decade.
Yeah,
I always have to
exactly.
think about when I think about a year, it's just a decade later. But
Yeah.
that's not just providers, that's just technology in general. To get to mass production and where it's highly accepted, it takes a long time. I think mainly people stop the change. I think technology would run faster. But Steve, I could go on and on and on about this, but we've run out of time. I want to thank you so much for being on this episode. It was very enlightening talking to you. How can our listeners get to your report? Is it Frost and Sullivan's website
Yeah.
or?
Yeah, we're subscription, so we sell the report and have services. So you buy either through your subscription, you have a member portal. If you just want to buy a one-off, you can go to the Frost storefront and pick it up. So that's the two ways, most common ways people will do that.
Well, thank you again, Stephen. Look forward to seeing you at our event, hopefully our G&E event, Global NaaS event in Dallas in October. But if not, I'm sure we'll see you in one of the other conferences.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me again.
Thanks for joining us for Executives at the Edge. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe today. Share online a review. Find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at MEF.net.